Blood-soaked and outnumbered, Thomas shielded the chief's pregnant daughter as 500 Blackfoot warriors surrounded them with spears raised for the kill. In that heartbeat before death or mercy, the lone cowboy found peace, knowing he'd done the one truly right thing in his broken life. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. Montana Territory, 1872. The wind whispered through the tall prairie grass, carrying with it the scent of sage and earth baked by the relentless summer sun. Thomas Hardin sat motionless atop his dun-colored stallion, one hand resting on the pommel of his saddle, the other adjusting the brim of his weather-beaten hat. His eyes, the color of a winter sky, scanned the horizon with the practiced vigilance of a man who had learned the hard way that survival depended on seeing trouble before it saw you. At 32, Thomas wore his years like the scars that marked his body, visible only if you knew where to look. His face, tanned and weathered from years under the open sky, remained impassive as he surveyed the rolling landscape before him. The war had taken something from him that no amount of distance or time seemed able to restore. That hollow feeling in his chest had become as familiar as the weight of the Colt revolver strapped to his thigh. He nudged his horse forward, following the faint tracks of cattle that had been driven through the area. 3 days he'd been trailing these rustlers, following the signs of his employer's stolen herd. Matheson would be expecting results, and Thomas wasn't a man who failed to deliver on his promises, not anymore. "Come on, Ghost," he murmured to his stallion. "Let's see where these bastards are hiding." The horse snorted in response, ears flicking forward as they descended into a narrow canyon, walls of red rock rising on either side like ancient sentinels. The air grew still between the stone barriers, amplifying the sound of Ghost's hooves against the hard-packed earth. Thomas's hand instinctively moved closer to his revolver. Canyons made for good ambush points, a lesson he'd learned during the war when wearing Union blue made him a target for Confederate sharpshooters. He dismounted at the mouth of a side passage, tying Ghost to a scrubby juniper before continuing on foot. The tracks were fresher here, disturbed earth still showing moisture beneath the surface. They were close. As the canyon narrowed further, voices drifted toward him, rough, male voices punctuated by laughter. Thomas pressed himself against the rock wall, inching forward until he could peer around a bend in the passage. What he saw made his blood run cold. It wasn't cattle rustlers he'd been tracking, but something far worse. 3 wagons were arranged in a half-circle around a small campfire. 6 men, armed and rough-looking, sat drinking and playing cards. But it was what, or rather who, was chained to the back of one wagon that caught Thomas's attention. A young Native American woman sat slumped against the wagon wheel, her wrists bound with iron shackles. Her black hair fell in tangled waves over her face, but couldn't hide the bruises on her cheekbones or the dried blood at the corner of her mouth. Her buckskin dress was torn at the shoulder, and despite her hunched posture, Thomas could see the unmistakable swell of her belly. She was pregnant. "Slave traders," he whispered to himself, the words like poison on his tongue. He'd heard rumors of men who captured native women and children to sell them to wealthy ranchers or mining camps, where they would live out their lives in servitude, or worse. The practice was illegal, but the law had little reach in these remote territories, and even less interest in enforcing justice when it came to indigenous peoples. The woman lifted her head slightly, and Thomas caught a glimpse of her face. Something in her eyes, a defiance that transcended her desperate situation, struck him like a physical blow. He had seen that same look before, in his sister Emma's eyes, the day the raiders had come to their homestead in Kansas, the day he'd failed to protect her. Thomas closed his eyes briefly, the memories he'd spent years trying to outrun suddenly fresh as an open wound. Emma's screams, the flames consuming their cabin. His own helplessness as he lay bleeding in the dirt, watching them drag his sister away. He never saw her again. He opened his eyes, his decision already made. He couldn't save Emma, but maybe he could save this woman. Thomas retreated silently, making his way back to Ghost. He would wait for nightfall. The darkness would be his ally, and with any luck, the whiskey those men were drinking would dull their senses enough to give him the advantage. As the sun began its descent behind the canyon walls, Thomas checked his revolver and the Winchester rifle strapped to his saddle. He had no illusions about what he was about to do. If he succeeded, he'd have dangerous enemies. If he failed, he'd be dead and the woman's fate would be sealed. Ghost nudged his shoulder, as if sensing his rider's dark thoughts. "Don't worry, boy," Thomas said quietly, stroking the stallion's neck. "We've faced worse odds." But even as he spoke the words, he wondered if they were true. The war had taught him to kill, but it had also taught him the cost of taking a life. Each death left a mark on your soul, a darkness that grew with every trigger pulled. Thomas looked toward the canyon where the woman was held captive. Maybe this time, just this once, violence could serve a purpose other than destruction. Maybe it could be the means to something better. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Thomas Harden prepared himself for what was to come. One way or another, by dawn, something would change. Darkness fell like a heavy blanket over the canyon, bringing with it a chill that belied the summer heat of the day. Thomas moved silently through the shadows, his footsteps barely disturbing the loose stones beneath his boots. Years of tracking both animals and men had taught him how to move unseen, a ghost among the living. The slave traders' camp had grown rowdier as the night deepened. The bottle passed between them had dulled their vigilance, their laughter growing louder, their movements less coordinated. Thomas counted them again from his vantage point behind a large boulder. 6 men, all armed, but only 2 seemed to be staying relatively sober. Those would be his primary concerns. He studied the layout of the camp, noting the position of each man, the distance to the wagon where the woman was chained, and the location of their horses tethered at the far end. The plan forming in his mind was risky, but simple plans often work best when everything went to hell, as it inevitably would. Thomas made his way around the perimeter of the camp, circling behind the area where the horses were kept. He approached the animals cautiously, speaking in low, soothing tones to prevent them from startling. Ghost followed at a distance, trained to wait for Thomas's whistle. "Easy now," he whispered, reaching into his pocket for the small pouch of dried chili peppers he carried. It wasn't a trick he was proud of, but it would serve his purpose tonight. Working quickly, he sprinkled the crushed peppers near the horses' nostrils, not close enough to cause real pain, but sufficient to agitate them. Then he retreated and waited. It didn't take long. One of the horses snorted, shaking its head vigorously before pulling against its tether. Another followed suit, and soon all of them were stamping and whinnying in distress. The commotion drew the attention of the men around the campfire. "What the hell's got into them?" one of the traders called out, rising unsteadily to his feet. "Probably smelled a mountain lion," another replied, reaching for his rifle. "Jackson, McTavish, go check it out." 2 men, one of the sober ones among them, reluctantly stood and made their way toward the horses. Thomas slipped deeper into the shadows, circling back toward the wagons while the men were distracted. The native woman was alert now, her head raised, watching the activity in the camp with wary eyes. As Thomas approached from behind the wagon, she sensed his presence. turning her head sharply in his direction. Their eyes met, and he pressed a finger to his lips, praying she would understand. For a moment, she stared at him with a mixture of fear and suspicion. Then, almost imperceptibly, she nodded. Thomas moved closer, examining the chain that secured her to the wagon wheel. The shackles would require a key, but the chain itself was fastened with a padlock. He pulled a small metal file from his boot, a tool that had saved his life more than once during the war. "I'm going to help you," he whispered, working the file against the weakest link in the chain. "But when the time comes, you need to run." "Do you understand?" The woman watched him work, her dark eyes reflecting the distant firelight. "Yes," she replied in accented but clear English. "I understand." Thomas glanced at her in surprise, but continued working on the chain. Behind them, the commotion with the horses had escalated, with the men now trying to calm the increasingly agitated animals. "I am Several Moon," she said quietly, her voice barely audible over the distant shouting. "Daughter of Chief Running Elk of the Blackfoot." The name sent a jolt through Thomas. Running Elk was well known throughout the territory, a powerful chief whose people controlled much of the northern plains. If this woman was indeed his daughter, these slave traders had made an even more dangerous mistake than he'd initially thought. The chain gave way with a soft clink, and Thomas quickly unwound it from around her ankles. "Babe, can you walk?" he asked, eyeing the swell of her belly with concern. Several Moon nodded, struggling to her feet with the grace of someone accustomed to enduring pain without complaint. The shackles on her wrists remained, but at least she was no longer tethered to the wagon. "Stay close behind me," Thomas instructed, leading her toward the edge of the camp opposite from where the men were still dealing with the horses. They had almost reached the shadows when a shout rang out behind them. "Hey, the squaw's loose!" Thomas turned to see one of the traders pointing in their direction, his face contorted with rage. In one fluid motion, Thomas drew his revolver and fired, the shot hitting the man in the shoulder and spinning him backward. "Run!" he urged Several Mooners, guiding her toward the mouth of the canyon where Ghost waited. Gunfire erupted behind them, bullets kicking up dust at their heels. Thomas fired back twice more, not aiming to kill, but to force the men to take cover. Several Moon moved with surprising speed despite her condition, but Thomas could see she wouldn't be able to maintain the pace for long. They reached Ghost, who stood alert but unafraid of the gunfire. With a quick movement, Thomas helped Several Moon onto the saddle before swinging up behind her. He kicked Ghost into motion, and the stallion leapt forward, powerful legs eating up the ground as they raced out of the canyon. More shots rang out, one whizzing past Thomas's ear close enough that he felt the air disturbed by its passage. Behind them, he could hear the traders scrambling for their own horses, shouting curses that echoed off the canyon walls. "Hold on," he told Several Moon as they emerged from the canyon into the open prairie. The night stretched before them, lit only by stars and a sliver of moon. Not enough light for a proper pursuit, Thomas hoped. Several Moon's hands gripped the saddle horn, her back straight despite her exhaustion. "They will follow," she said. Not a question, but a statement of fact. "Yes," Thomas replied, urging Ghost to a faster pace. "Indeed, but we have a head start, and night is on our side." As they rode deeper into the darkness, Thomas knew the real challenge had only just begun. By sunrise, the slave traders would be on their trail, and he had no illusions about what would happen if they were caught. But for now, with Several Moons safe behind him and Ghost's steady rhythm beneath them, Thomas allowed himself a brief moment of satisfaction. Some actions in life were complicated, their morality uncertain. This was not one of them. They rode hard through the night, Ghost's powerful strides carrying them across the moonlit prairie. Thomas kept to the rocky ground when possible, hoping to make their trail more difficult to follow. The cool night air carried the scent of sagebrush and distant rain, though the stars remained clearly visible overhead, small mercies that Thomas counted silently as they fled. Several Moon sat rigid in front of him, her body tense with each hoofbeat. She hadn't spoken since they'd left the canyon, but Thomas could feel her trembling, from cold, exhaustion, or fear, he couldn't tell. Probably all three. As the eastern sky began to lighten with the first hint of dawn, Thomas guided Ghost toward a cluster of cottonwoods that marked a small creek cutting through the prairie. The trees would provide cover, and both his horse and several Moon needed rest. "We'll stop here for a while," he said, bringing Ghost to a halt beneath the spreading branches of the largest cottonwood. "They won't be able to track us easily in the dark, but once the sun's up, they'll be on our trail again." Several Moon nodded, allowing him to help her down from the saddle. Her legs buckled slightly as her feet touched the ground, and Thomas caught her elbow to steady her. The iron shackles still encircling her wrists clinked softly with the movement. "Let me see if I can get those off," he said, gesturing to the restraints. She extended her arms wordlessly, watching as he retrieved the file from his boot once more. The metal was thick, and Thomas knew it would take time to weaken the locks enough to break them. "This will take a while," he warned her. "You should rest if you can." Several Moon settled herself against the trunk of the cottonwood, arranging her torn dress to cover as much of her legs as possible. Thomas removed his jacket and offered it to her. After a moment's hesitation, she accepted it, draping it over her shoulders. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For this, for everything." Thomas nodded, uncomfortable with gratitude. He began working on her shackles, the rhythmic scrape of the file against metal filling the silence between them. "Why did you help me?" Several Moon asked after a time, her dark eyes studying his face in the growing light. Thomas kept his gaze fixed on his work. "Those men had no right to take you. Many white men see no wrong in taking what is not theirs," she observed, no accusation in her voice, merely stating what experience had taught her. Thomas couldn't argue with that. "I'm not those men." "No," she agreed. "You are not." They fell silent again, the only sounds the file against metal and the soft murmur of the creek nearby. Ghost grazed contentedly a few yards away, occasionally lifting his head to scan their surroundings with alert ears. "How long were you their prisoner?" Thomas asked eventually. Several Moon's expression darkened. 3 days. They attacked while I was gathering herbs with 2 other women. The others escaped, but I..." She placed a protective hand over her swollen belly. "And I could not run fast enough." Thomas nodded, understanding the unspoken fear in her eyes. The child she carried would have been born into slavery, never knowing freedom or family. "Your husband," he began, then stopped, unsure how to phrase the question. "Dead," she replied simply. 6 moons ago. He was killed by white soldiers who claimed he had stolen horses." Her voice remained steady, but pain flashed across her features. "He was a good man. He would have been a good father." Thomas worked in silence for a moment, absorbing her words. "I'm sorry." She acknowledged his sympathy with a slight inclination of her head. "My father searches for me. I am sure of this. He will not rest until I am found." The first shackle broke open with a metallic snap, revealing a ring of raw, bruised skin beneath. Thomas gently removed the iron cuff and moved to work on the second one. "And your father?" "Running elk," Thomas said. "His reputation reaches far. They say he commands 500 warriors." 623, Several Moon corrected with a hint of pride, "and each would die for him without question." She studied Thomas's face. "Does this frighten you?" Thomas considered the question honestly. A wise man would be frightened. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "But you are not wise. Not according to most who know me," he admitted, returning her smile briefly before focusing again on the shackle. The eastern sky had brightened considerably, painting the scattered clouds in shades of pink and gold. They couldn't remain here much longer, Thomas knew. Once the sun was fully up, the slave traders would be on their trail, and they weren't the only threat. If Running Elk's warriors were searching for his daughter, they might not take kindly to finding her in the company of a white man. The second shackle broke open, and several moon rubbed her chafed wrists, relief evident in her expression. "Freedom," she whispered, almost to herself. Thomas stood, offering her his hand. "We should move on. There's a trading post, about half a day's ride north of here. The owner, Mackenzie, is a fair man. He has dealings with many tribes, including your people. He might help us get word to your father." Several Moon took his hand and rose to her feet with a grace that belied her condition. And then, Thomas hesitated. He hadn't thought beyond getting her to safety. "Then you go home, I suppose." She held his gaze for a long moment. "And you, Thomas Hardin? Where is your home?" The question caught him off guard, not just the question itself, but the fact that he had never told her his name. She must have overheard the slave traders using it. "I haven't had a real home since the war," he answered truthfully. "Ghost and the open country are home enough for me now." Several Moon's expression softened with something like understanding. Sometimes the heart must wander before it can find where it belongs. Before Thomas could respond, Ghost suddenly lifted his head, ears pricked forward, nostrils flaring. The stallion's behavior sent a jolt of alarm through Thomas. Something or someone was approaching. "Mount up," he said urgently, helping Several Moon onto Ghost's back before swinging up behind her. "We need to move." Now, they rode north through stands of pine and over rolling hills, keeping to the tree lines when possible to avoid being silhouetted against the morning sky. Thomas's instincts screamed danger, though they had yet to catch sight of their pursuers. Ghost seemed to sense the urgency, maintaining a strong pace despite having carried them through the night with little rest. Several Moon gripped the saddle horn, her back straight against Thomas's chest. She had not complained once, though he could only imagine the discomfort she must be feeling, pregnant, exhausted, and jostled by their hard ride. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice close to her ear to be heard over the rhythm of hoofbeats. "Yes," she replied, though the tightness in her voice betrayed her. After a moment, she added, "The child moves much today. He knows something is wrong." "He?" Thomas asked, momentarily distracted from scanning their surroundings. Several Moon nodded. "A son, I am certain of it, strong, like his father." She paused. "And stubborn, like his mother." A faint smile tugged at Thomas's lips despite their circumstances. "How much farther to your people's territory?" 2 days. Ride to the north and east," she said. "But my father will not be there. He and his warriors will be searching the plains for me." The thought was both reassuring and concerning. Finding Running Elk's war party before the slave traders caught up to them would mean safety for Several Moon. But a band of Blackfoot warriors encountering a lone white man with their chief's pregnant daughter might shoot first and ask questions never. Around midday, they paused at a small stream to allow Ghost to drink and rest. Thomas helped Several Moon down, noting the wince she tried to hide as her feet touched the ground. "We're making good time," he told her, filling his canteen in the clear stream. Mackenzie's trading post should be just over that ridge if I've got my bearings right. Several Moon accepted the canteen gratefully, drinking deeply before replying. These men who took me, they will not stop. Thomas nodded grimly. I know. Men like that can't afford to let you go. If word got back to your father about what they tried to do, he left the implications unspoken. They would be hunted to the ends of the earth, she finished for him. My father's vengeance would be without mercy. Thomas checked his ammunition, counting the bullets remaining in his revolver and rifle. Not enough if it came to a prolonged fight. I'm hoping Mackenzie can provide fresh horses and supplies. From there, we'll have a better chance of finding your father's search party. Several Moons studied him with those penetrating dark eyes that seemed to see more than he wanted to reveal. You risk much for a stranger? Thomas busied himself adjusting Ghost's saddle straps. Seems to me you've risked more just by being born who you are. She nodded, understanding his meaning. Being the daughter of a powerful chief made her both protected and vulnerable, a valuable target for those who wished to control or harm her people. The sudden cry of a hawk drew Thomas's attention skyward. The bird circled once, then dove out of sight beyond the next hill. Something about its movement seemed unnatural, too purposeful, too direct. We need to move, he said, his instincts prickling with warning. And now, they had just mounted Ghost when the first rider appeared on the ridge behind them, then another and another, 6 in total. The slave traders had found their trail sooner than Thomas had hoped. Hiya, he urged Ghost forward, the stallions surging into a gallop as bullets began kicking up dirt around them. They raced across the open ground toward the next stand of trees, several Moon clinging to the saddle horn as Thomas guided Ghost with pressure from his knees, freeing his hands to draw his rifle. He twisted in the saddle, firing a shot that forced one of the pursuers to veer off course. There! Several Moon pointed ahead where the land dropped away into a steep ravine. We can lose them there! Thomas directed Ghost toward the ravine, trusting Several Moon's knowledge of the terrain. The stallion plunged down the incline, sliding more than running as loose shale gave way beneath his hooves. Behind them, their pursuers hesitated at the top of the ravine, unwilling to risk the dangerous descent at full speed. At the bottom, a narrow stream wound its way between rock walls that rose 20 feet on either side. Thomas guided Ghost along the stream bed, the water muffling the sound of the horses' hooves. If we follow this far enough, it opens into a box canyon, Several Moon said urgently. We would be trapped. How far to the other side? Thomas asked, ducking as they passed under a low overhang of rock. Not far. There is a game trail that climbs out to the north. They rode on, the sounds of pursuit growing fainter behind them. The ravine twisted and turned, each bend offering momentary concealment from anyone following. Ghost navigated the rocky stream bed with sure-footed determination, water splashing up around his fetlocks. As they rounded another bend, Several Moon suddenly tensed. Stop! She whispered. Thomas reined in Ghost, listening intently. At first, he heard nothing but the gurgle of the stream and Ghost's heavy breathing. Then it came to him, the soft nickering of horses and the murmur of voices ahead. Could be Mackenzie's people, Thomas said quietly, though he doubted his own words. The trading post was still miles away. Several Moon shook her head. No. Her voice held absolute certainty. Before Thomas could question her further, a mounted figure appeared around the next bend in the ravine. The man sat tall and proud on a paint horse, his long black hair adorned with eagle feathers. His face was painted with red and black stripes, and in his hand he held a lance decorated with scalps. Behind him, more warriors emerged, 10, 20, then more than Thomas could quickly count. Their faces were stern, their weapons ready. Several moon exhaled softly, a sound that might have been relief or fear, or both. "My father," she said simply. Chief Running Elk had found his daughter. Time seemed to stand still in the narrow ravine. The only sounds were the gentle gurgle of the stream and the soft nickering of horses as the two groups faced each other. Thomas felt Several Moon's body relax slightly against him, but his own muscles remained tense, acutely aware of the dozens of arrows and rifles now trained on him. Chief Running Elk raised his hand, and his warriors halted. His gaze, sharp as an eagle's, moved from his daughter to Thomas, his expression unreadable beneath the war paint that adorned his weathered face. He was older than Thomas had expected, perhaps in his 50s, but his posture and the set of his shoulders spoke of a strength undiminished by age. Several Moons straightened, lifting her chin with quiet dignity. She spoke in her native tongue, her voice clear and strong despite her exhaustion. Thomas understood none of the words, but he recognized the respect and love in her tone as she addressed her father. Running Elk listened without interruption, his eyes never leaving Thomas's face. Whatever Several Moon was saying, it didn't appear to be softening the chief's stern expression. When she finished speaking, Running Elk raised his lance slightly, not threateningly, but with purpose. "You are Thomas Hardin," he said in heavily accented but clear English. It wasn't a question. Thomas nodded, keeping his hands visible and away from his weapons. "I am. My daughter says you freed her from men who would sell her like an animal." Running Elk's voice was deep and measured. Why would a white man do this? Thomas felt the weight of every warrior's gaze upon him. One wrong word, one misinterpreted gesture, and he would die in this ravine, his body left for the coyotes and ravens, because it was right. He answered simply, "No one deserves to be enslaved." Running Elk studied him, as if searching for deceit in his eyes. Many white men speak of right things while their hands do wrong. "I can't speak for other men," Thomas replied. "Only for myself." A tense silence followed, broken only when Several Moons spoke again to her father in their language, her tone more insistent this time. She gestured to the shackles that now hung empty from her saddle, evidence of her captivity and rescue. One of the younger warriors, his face painted with lightning bolts across his cheeks, urged his horse forward slightly. "The white man cannot be trusted, Chief," he said in English, clearly intending for Thomas to hear. "He may have planned this to gain your favor or to infiltrate our people." Several Moon turned to the warrior, her eyes flashing with anger. "Be silent, Black Knife. You know nothing of what I have endured or of this man's actions." The warrior, Black Knife, scowled but retreated under Running Elk's sharp glance. The chief dismounted in one fluid motion that belied his age, handing his lance to a nearby warrior. He approached Ghost, who stood steady under Thomas's reassuring hand. With gentle care that contrasted with his fierce appearance, Running Elk helped his daughter down from the saddle. Several Moon embraced her father briefly before turning back to Thomas. "My father wishes to know if you seek payment for my rescue," she translated, though Thomas suspected the chief understood English better than he let on. "No," Thomas said firmly, meeting Running Elk's gaze. "I want nothing." Running Elk nodded slightly, as if this answer confirmed something for him. He spoke to Several Moon, who listened attentively before responding to Thomas. "My father says that a life saved creates a bond that cannot be broken," she explained. "You are now connected to our family, whether you wish it or not." Before Thomas could respond, the distant sound of hoofbeats echoed down the ravine. The slave traders had found their way into the stream bed. Black Knife and several other warriors immediately moved to defensive positions, readying their weapons. Running Elk barked orders, and warriors began to position themselves along the ravine walls with practiced efficiency. "They come," Several Moon said unnecessarily, her hand instinctively moving to her belly in a protective gesture. Thomas dismounted, drawing his rifle. "These men are dangerous and desperate," he told Running Elk directly. "They won't surrender, even against your numbers." Running Elk's expression hardened. "Then they will die." He turned to Several Moon, speaking rapidly in their language. She nodded and allowed two female warriors who had been riding with the group to lead her toward the back of the formation, out of danger. As she passed Thomas, Several Moon touched his arm briefly. "Be careful," she said softly. "These are my father's best warriors, but those men have the desperation of cornered wolves." Thomas nodded, turning his attention back to Running Elk. "I'll fight alongside your men, if you'll allow it." The chief considered him for a moment, then nodded once. "You have proven yourself a warrior already by saving my daughter. Now we will see if you fight as one." The hoofbeats grew louder, and Thomas took position behind a large boulder near the center of the ravine. Running Elk stationed himself nearby, a Winchester rifle now in his hands, a weapon not unlike Thomas's own. "Those men took your daughter because they believed they would face no consequences," Thomas said quietly. "They didn't know who she was, or they wouldn't have dared." Running Elk's eyes narrowed. "Many moons ago, I would have killed you simply for being white," he replied with unexpected candor. "But I have learned that not all white men are the same, just as not all Blackfoot are the same. Some have honor." He paused. "We will see if these men have any." The first of the slave traders rounded the bend in the ravine, pulling up short at the sight of dozens of Blackfoot warriors positioned throughout the narrow passage. The others bunched up behind him, their expressions shifting from confusion to alarm as they realized the situation. The leader, a burly man with a scar running down his left cheek, whom Thomas recognized as the one who had first raised the alarm during Several Moon's rescue, stared in disbelief. His hand moved toward his holster, but he seemed to think better of it as he counted the warriors facing him. "We don't want no trouble with you people," he called out, his voice echoing off the ravine walls. "We're just tracking a horse thief who took something that belongs to us." Running Elk stepped forward, his rifle held casually but ready. "You speak of my daughter as something," he said, his voice deadly calm. "You chain her like an animal and call her your property." He raised his hand, and every warrior tensed, weapons aimed at the slave traders. "You have entered Blackfoot land. You have taken Blackfoot blood. Now you will pay the price." The slave trader's face paled as he realized who stood before him. "Now hold on," he said, raising his hands placatingly. "There's been a mistake. We didn't know she was your... If she had been the daughter of a poor man, would that have made your crime less?" Running Elk interrupted, his voice like thunder in the narrow space. "The life of every woman of my people is sacred." Thomas watched the traders exchange glances, seeing the calculation in their eyes. They were outnumbered and outpositioned, but cornered men were unpredictable. His finger rested lightly on the trigger of his rifle, ready. The scarred slave trader's eyes darted from Running Elk to the warriors positioned throughout the ravine, clearly calculating his odds. His 5 companions sat tensely on their horses behind him, hands hovering near their weapons. Thomas could almost see the man's thoughts churning behind his eyes, whether to surrender, flee, or fight. "Listen," the trader said, forcing a placating tone that didn't reach his cold eyes. "We're businessmen, not murderers. Let us ride out of here and we'll forget the whole thing." Running Elk's expression remained impassive. "You will not leave this place until justice is done." The trader's face hardened. "And what's your idea of justice, Chief? In the old days, Running Elk replied evenly. "We would have taken your scalps and left your bodies for the wolves." He paused, letting the words sink in. "But times change. Surrender your weapons, and you will be taken to the white man's fort to face their law." A harsh laugh escaped the scarred man. "The white man's law? You think they'll hang us over an Indian woman?" He shook his head. "You're a fool, old man." Thomas saw the insult register in Running Elk's eyes, though the chief's expression remained unchanged. The tension in the ravine thickened like storm clouds gathering before a deluge. "I give you one chance," Running Elk said, his voice dangerously soft. "Lay down your guns." For a moment, it seemed the trader might comply. His shoulders slumped slightly, and he began to reach for his holster as if to remove it. Then, with the speed of a striking rattlesnake, he drew his revolver instead, aiming directly at Running Elk. Thomas reacted instantly. His rifle cracked, the shot echoing off the ravine walls as the trader was knocked backward, a red stain blossoming on his shirt. The ravine erupted into chaos. The remaining traders opened fire, bullets ricocheting off rocks and sending splinters flying from tree trunks. The Blackfoot warriors responded with a volley of arrows and rifle fire, their war cries filling the air with a sound that raised the hair on the back of Thomas's neck. 2 traders fell immediately, pierced by multiple arrows. Another managed to wheel his horse around, attempting to flee back down the ravine, only to be cut down by a warrior's well-aimed shot. Thomas moved quickly to Running Elk's side, both men taking cover behind the large boulder as bullets struck around them. "Are you hit?" Thomas asked, scanning the chief for injuries. Running Elk shook his head, a new respect in his eyes as he regarded Thomas. "Your shot was true. You saved my life." "They gave us no choice," Thomas replied grimly, reloading his rifle with practiced efficiency. The remaining 2 traders had dismounted and taken cover behind their fallen horses, firing desperately at the warriors who were now closing in from both sides of the ravine. One of them spotted Thomas and recognized him, his face contorting with hatred. "You!" he shouted, shifting his aim toward Thomas. "You're dead, Hardin." Thomas ducked as a bullet whistled past his ear, then rose and fired in one smooth motion. The trader jerked backward, his rifle discharging harmlessly into the air as he fell. The last trader, seeing his companions dead or dying, threw down his weapon and raised his hands. "Don't shoot! I surrender!" Warriors approached cautiously, arrows and rifles still trained on the man. Blackknife, his face fierce with battle lust, stepped forward with a knife drawn. "No," Running Elk commanded sharply. "We will honor what I said." "He will face white man's justice." Blackknife hesitated, clearly disappointed, but obeyed his chief. 2 warriors disarmed the trader and bound his hands with rawhide strips. As the echoes of gunfire faded, leaving only the sounds of wounded men groaning and horses nervously stamping, Thomas surveyed the carnage with a heavy heart. Violence was sometimes necessary, but he took no pleasure in it. Each death, justified or not, was another weight on his soul. Running Elk seemed to sense his thoughts. "You fight well, but do not love the killing," he observed quietly. "This is good. Only a fool finds joy in taking life." Before Thomas could respond, several Moon appeared from behind the protective line of warriors, hurrying toward her father with concern etched on her face. She embraced Running Elk briefly before turning to Thomas, her eyes quickly scanning him for injuries. "You are unharmed?" she asked, relief evident in her voice when she saw no blood on him. Thomas nodded. "I'm fine." He looked at the bodies strewn across the ravine floor. "I'm sorry it came to this." Several Moon's expression hardened as she gazed at the fallen slave traders. They chose their path. "The consequences are theirs to bear, not yours." Running Elk gave orders to his warriors, who began securing the site, tending to a few who had suffered minor wounds and collecting the traders' weapons. The captured trader was placed under heavy guard, his expression one of sullen resignation. "What will happen to him?" Thomas asked, nodding toward the prisoner. "He will be taken to Fort Benton," Running Elk replied. "The soldiers there will decide his fate if they release him." The chief left the implications unspoken, but his meaning was clear. The Blackfoot would administer their own justice if the white man's law failed. Several Moon spoke to her father in their language, gesturing toward Thomas as she did. Running Elk listened attentively, occasionally glancing at Thomas with an inscrutable expression. Finally, he nodded. "And my daughter wishes you to accompany us to our camp," Running Elk informed Thomas. "She says you need rest and food before you continue your journey." A hint of amusement touched the chief's eyes. "She is very stubborn, my daughter." Several Moon lifted her chin. "I am Chief's daughter. I must be stubborn to survive." For the first time, Thomas saw Running Elk smile, a brief softening of his stern features that transformed his face. "And like her mother," he said with quiet fondness before turning serious once more. "Will you come, Thomas Hardin? You have earned a place at our fire." Thomas hesitated. He still had a job to do. Matheson's cattle were still missing, and he had been hired to find them. But the exhaustion of the past day and night was catching up to him, and the thought of a meal and rest was undeniably appealing. More than that, though, was the pull he felt toward Several Moon, a connection he didn't fully understand but couldn't deny. There was something about her strength, her dignity in the face of hardship, that spoke to something deep within him. "I'll come," he said finally, "but I can't stay long. I have obligations to fulfill." Running Elk nodded in understanding. A man of honor keeps his word. "This too is good." He extended his hand in the white man's gesture of agreement, a sign of respect that wasn't lost on Thomas. As they prepared to leave the ravine, Thomas found himself walking beside Several Moon, leading Ghost by the reins. The stallion nudged his shoulder affectionately, seemingly untroubled by the recent violence. "Your father is an unusual man," Thomas observed quietly. Several Moon smiled. "He has seen much change in his life. He knows that the old ways are passing, but he wishes to preserve what is best in them while learning what is good in the new." "A wise approach," Thomas said. "Not common among either whites or Indians in my experience." "That is why he is chief," she replied simply. She walked in silence for a few steps before adding, "He likes you, I think." Thomas raised an eyebrow in surprise. "He has an unusual way of showing it." Several Moon's laugh was unexpected and musical, brightening her tired face. "Did you expect him to welcome with open arms the white man riding with his daughter? Be grateful he did not have you tied up and questioned for days." Despite everything, Thomas found himself smiling in response. "When you put it that way, I suppose I got off easy." As they climbed out of the ravine to join the main body of Running Elk's warriors, Thomas couldn't help but feel he was crossing more than just a physical boundary. Something was changing within him, something he wasn't entirely ready for, but couldn't seem to resist. The Blackfoot camp sprawled across a sheltered valley beside a winding river, the conical shapes of dozens of teepees rising against the backdrop of pine-covered hills. As Thomas rode in with Running Elk's war party, women and children emerged from their dwellings, their initial wariness giving way to excitement when they saw Several Moon among the returning warriors. Word of her rescue spread rapidly through the camp. Women called out greetings, relief evident in their voices. Children ran alongside the horses, pointing at Thomas with undisguised curiosity. It was clear from their reactions that Several Moon was deeply loved by her people. Thomas felt the weight of countless eyes upon him, some curious, others suspicious. A white man riding freely into their camp was an unusual sight, especially one who had been accepted, however tentatively, by their chief. "No, they stare because they do not understand," Several Moon said quietly, noting his discomfort. "Few white men have come here in peace." Running Elk led them to the center of the camp, where a large teepee stood, decorated with painted symbols and animal hides. The chief dismounted and helped Several Moon down from the horse she had been given to ride after leaving the ravine. "My daughter needs rest," Running Elk announced to the gathering crowd. "She will tell her story when she has recovered her strength." He gestured to Thomas. "This man, Thomas Hardin, rescued Several Moon from those who would harm her. He is our guest." Thomas dismounted, keeping a reassuring hand on Ghost's neck as the stallion surveyed the unfamiliar surroundings with alert ears. A young boy was assigned to take Ghost to graze with the tribe's horses, but the stallion refused to follow until Thomas spoke to him gently, giving permission. "Your horse trusts only you," Running Elk observed. "We've been through a lot together," Thomas replied simply. An elderly woman approached Several Moon, embracing her with tears in her eyes. The two spoke rapidly in Blackfoot, the older woman's hands moving to Several Moon's belly in a gesture of concern. "My grandmother," Several Moon explained to Thomas. "She will care for me now." She turned to her father and spoke briefly in their language. Running Elk nodded, then addressed Thomas. "My daughter says you have not slept or eaten properly since you found her. Come, you will rest in my lodge. Food will be brought." Thomas glanced at Several Moon, who gave him a reassuring nod before allowing her grandmother to lead her away toward another large teepee. He realized he was indeed bone-weary, the adrenaline of the past day finally draining from his body, leaving leaden exhaustion in its wake. Inside Running Elk's lodge, Thomas was directed to a pile of buffalo robes where he could rest. The interior was spacious and surprisingly comfortable, with a small fire burning in a central pit, the smoke rising to escape through an opening at the top. Weapons and ceremonial items hung from the lodge poles, and elaborately beaded clothing was carefully stored in parfleche containers. A young woman brought in a wooden bowl filled with a rich stew of buffalo meat and wild roots, along with a flat bread that Thomas recognized as similar to the journey cake some white settlers made. He ate gratefully, the hot food reviving his spirits somewhat. Running Elk sat across the fire from him, watching him with thoughtful eyes. "You carry many burdens, Thomas Hardin," the chief said after a while. "And I see it in the way you hold yourself, in your eyes." Thomas paused in his eating, surprised by the observation. "Don't we all?" "Yes," Running Elk agreed, "but some carry more than their share." He leaned forward slightly. "My daughter told me you spoke of a sister who was taken. This is why you saved her." Thomas set down his bowl, his appetite suddenly diminished. "Maybe. I couldn't save Emma. She's been gone for 15 years now." He hadn't spoken of his sister to anyone in a very long time, and he wasn't sure why he was doing so now. Running Elk nodded, understanding in his eyes. The past shapes us, but it need not own us. He gestured to the lodge around them. "I have lost 3 sons to war and disease. My wife died bringing Several Moon into this world, yet still I find reasons to continue." "Several Moon," Thomas said quietly. "Yes, she is my heart now." Running Elk's expression softened momentarily before returning to its usual stoic demeanor. "And soon her child will be another reason." They sat in companionable silence for a time, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the distant activities of the camp. Thomas found himself relaxing despite the unfamiliar surroundings, his eyelids growing heavy with exhaustion. "Rest," Running Elk said, rising to his feet. "We will speak more when you have slept." Thomas didn't need to be told twice. He stretched out on the buffalo robes, their warmth and the lingering scent of wood smoke enveloping him as he drifted into a deep, dreamless sleep. He woke to the sound of voices outside the lodge, the quality of light telling him it was late afternoon. He had slept for several hours. Rising, he found fresh water in a container near where he had slept, and he used it to wash his face and hands, feeling remarkably refreshed. Stepping outside, Thomas found the camp alive with activity. Women worked at various tasks, preparing hides, cooking, weaving baskets, while men repaired weapons or worked with horses. Children played games, their laughter carrying on the breeze. It struck him how ordinary it all seemed, how similar to any community of people simply living their lives. "You slept well." The voice belonged to Blackknife, who approached with an expression that suggested he still had reservations about Thomas's presence. "I did," Thomas replied neutrally, taking the measure of the young warrior. Up close, he could see that Blackknife was perhaps in his early 20s. His face marked not only with the lightning bolt paint, but also a scar that ran from his temple to his jaw, likely a battle wound. "Running Elk may trust you because you saved his daughter, but I am not so easily convinced," Blackknife said without preamble. "Why would a white man help one of us? What do you truly want?" Thomas met the young man's challenging gaze steadily. "I want nothing except to know Several Moon is safe." "She would be safer if you left," Blackknife countered. "Your presence here brings danger. The army hears of a white man living among us. They will think you are captive. They will come." There was some truth to that, Thomas had to admit. The army had been known to use reports of white captives as an excuse for raids on native camps. "I don't intend to stay long," Thomas assured him. "Just until I'm certain Several Moon has recovered from her ordeal." Blackknife's eyes narrowed. "You look at her in a way that is not right for a white man." Thomas felt a flash of irritation. "I look at her with respect. There's nothing wrong in that." "Respect," Blackknife repeated skeptically. "Is that what white men call it?" He took a step closer, his voice dropping. "She is Chief's daughter. She carries the child of a great warrior who died defending our hunting grounds. She is not for you." Before Thomas could respond, a woman's voice called Blackknife's name. He gave Thomas one last warning look before turning away to answer the summons. Thomas exhaled slowly, trying to release the tension from the encounter. Blackknife wasn't entirely wrong in his suspicions. Thomas had recognized something stirring within himself when it came to Several Moon, an admiration that went beyond mere respect. But he had no illusions about what that might mean. Their worlds were too different, the barriers between them too high. Blackknife has a sharp tongue, but a good heart. Several Moon appeared beside him, looking refreshed after her rest. She wore a clean buckskin dress adorned with intricate beadwork, her hair freshly braided and decorated with small shells. "He was my husband's closest friend. His grief still burns hot." "I understand," Thomas said, and he did. Grief could manifest as anger, especially when directed at a convenient target. Several Moon studied his face. "You slept?" "Yes. Your father was most hospitable," she smiled. "He wishes to honor you properly tonight. There will be a feast to celebrate my return and to thank you for what you did." Thomas shifted uncomfortably. "That's not necessary. It is our way," she said simply. "To refuse would be an insult." Thomas nodded, conceding the point. "Then I'm honored." Several Moon's gaze turned thoughtful. "You said yesterday you have obligations to fulfill." What are these obligations? I work for a rancher named Matheson, Thomas explained. And I was tracking stolen cattle when I found you. I need to complete that job. And after, she asked, where will you go then? Thomas had no ready answer. He had been drifting for years, taking jobs where he could find them, never staying in one place long enough to form attachments. I don't know, he admitted. Wherever the work takes me, I suppose. Several Moon considered this. A man should have a place to call home, she said finally, somewhere his heart can rest. Before Thomas could respond, Running Elk approached, accompanied by several elders of the tribe. The time for private conversation was over. The evening's ceremonies were about to begin, and Thomas found himself swept up in preparations for a celebration he had never sought, but could not refuse. As twilight descended over the Blackfoot camp, the celebration began. A large bonfire blazed at the center of a clearing, casting long shadows that danced across the faces of the gathered tribe. Drums beat a steady rhythm that seemed to match the pulsing of Thomas's heart as he sat in the place of honor beside Running Elk, acutely aware of the significance of his position. Several Moon sat on her father's other side, her face glowing in the firelight. Her grandmother had adorned her hair with additional decorations, small feathers and beads that caught the light when she moved. Despite her recent ordeal, she carried herself with quiet dignity, acknowledging the greetings and well wishes of her people with gracious nods. The feast itself was more elaborate than Thomas had expected. Roasted buffalo meat, dried berries reconstituted in fat, roots prepared in ways unfamiliar to him but surprisingly flavorful. All were shared generously. Women moved among the gathering, offering food from communal bowls, ensuring everyone partook of the celebration. Eat well, Running Elk encouraged him. It honors those who prepared the meal. Thomas did his best, accepting each offering with a nod of thanks. He noticed that several Moon ate sparingly, perhaps still recovering from her captivity, or maybe due to her pregnancy making certain foods unappealing. As the meal concluded, an elderly man whom Thomas had seen among Running Elk's advisors rose and approached the fire. The drumming ceased and a hush fell over the gathering. The old man began to speak, his voice carrying surprising strength despite his advanced years. He is telling the story of my daughter's capture and rescue, Running Elk explained quietly to Thomas. Our history is kept in such stories, passed from mouth to ear through generations. Thomas listened, though he couldn't understand the words. The old man's voice rose and fell with the cadence of a practiced storyteller, his hands gesturing to emphasize certain points. When he indicated Thomas, every eye turned to regard him, some with newfound respect, others still wary but less openly hostile than before. When the storyteller finished, Running Elk stood. He spoke in Blackfoot first, then switched to English, presumably for Thomas's benefit. The white man, Thomas Hardin, found my daughter when she was in great danger. He freed her from those who would sell her like a horse or a blanket. When these evil men pursued, he protected her with his own life. When I found them, he stood ready to defend her again, not knowing if I came as friend or enemy. Running Elk paused, his gaze sweeping over his people before settling on Thomas. For these actions, we name him Friend of the Blackfoot. His life is sacred to us, as the life of a brother. From a parfleche bag, Running Elk withdrew something wrapped in soft leather. He unwrapped it to reveal a necklace, a circular medallion of polished bone hanging from a cord of braided sinew. Intricate carvings covered the medallion, symbols Thomas didn't recognize, but understood to be significant. This belonged to my father, and to his father before him, Running Elk explained. It is a chief's medicine, meant to protect and guide the wearer. I give it now to you, Thomas Hardin, so that you will never forget that you have family among the Blackfoot." A murmur ran through the crowd. Surprise, perhaps even some disapproval. Blackknife, seated across the fire, scowled openly. Clearly, this was an exceptional honor, one that not everyone agreed with. Thomas stood, momentarily speechless. The gift represented far more than mere gratitude. It was a symbolic adoption, a recognition that went beyond any acknowledgement he had expected or sought. "I'm honored," he said finally, the words feeling inadequate, "but I don't know if I deserve such a gift. A man who must be told he deserves honor usually is the one most worthy of it," Running Elk replied, placing the necklace over Thomas's head. The medallion rested against his chest, surprisingly heavy for its size. "Wear it in health, Thomas Hardin, and know that you will always find welcome at our fires." The ceremony continued with dancing and more drumming. Warriors performed demonstrations of skill and bravery, leaping and spinning around the fire in elaborate regalia. Women sang songs in high, clear voices that carried into the night sky. Children watched with wide eyes, absorbing the traditions of their people. Throughout it all, Thomas found his gaze repeatedly drawn to several Moon. Once, he caught her watching him as well, and she didn't look away. Something passed between them in that moment, a recognition, perhaps, of possibilities neither dared to voice. As the night deepened and the celebration began to wind down, several Moon approached him, moving carefully to accommodate her pregnancy. "Walk with me?" she asked, gesturing toward the edge of the camp where the firelight faded into darkness. Thomas hesitated, aware of Blackknife's watchful eyes and the impropriety that might be perceived. But Running Elk gave an almost imperceptible nod of permission, and Thomas rose to accompany her. They walked in companionable silence until they reached a small rise overlooking the river. The moon, nearly full, cast a silver path across the water's surface. Several moons stood with her face lifted to the night breeze, the moonlight illuminating her profile. "My people believe that when we die, our spirits follow the path of souls," she said, indicating the swath of stars that white men called the Milky Way. "It is a river in the sky, leading to the place where all are reunited with those they have lost." Thomas touched the medallion at his chest. "Your father has shown me great honor." "He sees in you something rare," she replied. "A white man with an Indian heart." "I'm just a man trying to do what's right," Thomas said uncomfortably. Several Moon turned to face him fully. "Many men speak of right and wrong, but few act when action is needed. You acted. You risked your life for a woman you did not know, from a people not your own." Her hand rose, hesitating briefly before touching the medallion. "This means you are family now. You understand?" Thomas nodded slowly. "I think so." Her fingers moved from the medallion to rest lightly against his chest. Thomas remained still, hardly daring to breathe. They stood close enough that he could see the flecks of amber in her dark eyes, could catch the faint scent of herbs and smoke that clung to her hair. "You must leave tomorrow," she said, not a question but a statement of fact. "Yes," he acknowledged. "I gave my word to Matheson. I need to finish the job." Several Moon nodded, understanding and something like resignation in her expression. "A man of honor keeps his promises." She echoed her father's words from earlier. "Will you return?" The question hung between them, weighted with implications neither was ready to fully address. Thomas had spent years avoiding attachments, commitments, anything that might root him to one place or person. The thought of returning both attracted and terrified him. "I don't know," he answered honestly. Several Moons studied his face, seeming to read the conflict within him. Sometimes the heart knows what the mind cannot accept, she said softly. Listen to it, Thomas Hardin. It will guide you true. Before he could respond, she rose on her toes and pressed her lips gently to his cheek, a gesture so unexpected that Thomas stood frozen in place. Then she stepped back, her expression composed once more. We should return, she said. People will talk if we are gone too long. As they walked back toward the fires, Thomas felt the weight of the medallion against his chest, a physical reminder of connections he hadn't sought, but now couldn't deny. For years, he had drifted, untethered, allowing the currents of circumstance to carry him from one place to another. Now, for the first time since Emma's loss, he felt the pull of something, someone drawing him toward a fixed point. It was terrifying, it was exhilarating, and as he escorted Several Moon back to her grandmother's lodge, Thomas knew with sudden clarity that whatever path he chose from here, nothing would ever be quite the same again. Dawn broke over the Blackfoot camp in a wash of pale gold and rose, the early light catching on dewy grass and morning mist rising from the river. Thomas stood beside Ghost, securing his few belongings to the saddle. The stallion was well rested and eager to move. Sensing his rider's intention to depart, Thomas touched the bone medallion that now hung around his neck, the weight of it already familiar against his chest. He had slept with it through the night, and his dreams had been filled with unfamiliar visions, vast prairies, thundering herds of buffalo, and Several Moon's face illuminated by firelight. Running Elk approached, his steps deliberate and dignified. "Now you leave with the sun," he observed. Thomas nodded. "I need to pick up the trail before it grows any colder." "The cattle thieves will have moved far by now," Running Elk said. "They were seen crossing the North Ridge 3 days past." Thomas looked at him in surprise. "You know where they went?" A hint of amusement touched the chief's stern features. "Nothing moves on these plains without my people knowing of it. We may not interfere in white men's disputes over cattle, but we watch. That information would be valuable to me," Thomas admitted. Running Elk nodded. "I will have 2 hawks guide you to where they were last seen. He is a good tracker and knows the Northern Territories well." "Thank you," Thomas said, genuinely grateful for the assistance that might shave days off his search. The chief's expression grew more serious. "Oh, when your task is complete, what then?" It was the same question Several Moon had asked the night before, and Thomas still had no clear answer. "I don't know," he said honestly. "I've been wondering a long time." Running Elk studied him with those penetrating eyes that seemed to see more than Thomas wanted to reveal. A man cannot wander forever. Eventually, the heart demands a home. Before Thomas could respond, Blackknife approached, leading a spotted pony. His expression was guarded but less hostile than the previous day. 2 hawks is preparing for the journey, he informed Running Elk. He will be ready to leave shortly. Running Elk nodded in acknowledgement, then said something in Blackfoot that caused Blackknife to frown before reluctantly nodding. The chief turned back to Thomas. "Blackknife will accompany you as well," he announced. "He knows the language of the white settlers better than 2 hawks." Thomas glanced at Blackknife, seeing the young warrior's barely concealed displeasure at the assignment. "Is that necessary? I wouldn't want to impose." "It is decided," Running Elk said with finality. 2 are safer than 1 on the trail, and Blackknife has much to learn about the world beyond our borders. Thomas understood then. This was as much about Blackknife's education as it was about his own safety. Running Elk was using this opportunity to build a bridge between his people and the white world, starting with the 2 men who had the most reason to distrust each other. Blackknife said something in Blackfoot, his tone respectful but firm. Running Elk replied with equal firmness, and the young warrior's shoulders slumped slightly in resignation. "I will prepare my weapons," Blackknife said in English, deliberately looking at Thomas. "We leave when Two Hawks is ready." He turned and strode away, his back straight with wounded pride. "He doesn't want to come," Thomas observed. "What we want is not always what we need," Running Elk replied. Blackknife sees only enemies when he looks at white men. This blinds him. He must learn to see people as individuals, not merely as tribes. Thomas couldn't argue with the wisdom of that, though he wondered if forcing Blackknife to accompany him would achieve Running Elk's goal, or simply deepen the young warrior's resentment. Movement near the center of the camp caught Thomas's attention. Several Moon was making her way toward them, carrying something wrapped in soft leather. Despite the early hour, she was fully dressed in a beautifully beaded buckskin dress, her hair neatly braided and adorned with small shells. The sight of her sent an unexpected warmth through Thomas's chest. "My daughter comes to bid you farewell," Running Elk said, a knowing look in his eyes. "I will check on Two Hawks. Preparations." He departed with the quiet dignity that seemed to characterize his every movement, leaving Thomas and Several Moon alone. "I brought you something for your journey," Several Moon said, offering the leather-wrapped bundle. Thomas accepted it, carefully unwrapping the leather to reveal a small pouch of dried meat, another of what looked like pemmican, and a beautifully crafted knife sheath decorated with intricate beadwork. "The food will sustain you for several days," she explained. "The sheath I made last night, I made. It is not as fine as it should be, there was little time, but it will protect your blade." Thomas was touched by the gifts, particularly the sheath that represented hours of careful work. "Thank you," he said, removing his hunting knife from its worn leather sheath and sliding it into the new one. It fit perfectly. "It's beautiful." Several Moon smiled, pleased by his appreciation. "It will remind you of your promise." "Promise?" Thomas questioned, not recalling making any specific commitment. "To listen to your heart," she reminded him. "You did not say the words, but I saw the promise in your eyes." Thomas felt a tightness in his throat. This woman saw through him in ways that were both unsettling and strangely comforting. "I'll remember," he said quietly. Several Moon's expression grew more serious. "My time approaches," she said, her hand moving to her belly. "When the moon is full again, my son will come into this world." The significance of her words wasn't lost on Thomas. She was giving him a timeline, a point by which he should have made his decision. "I hope," he began, but she placed her fingers gently against his lips, stopping his words. "Hope is a seed that grows in silence," she said. "Let it be unspoken for now." They stood looking at each other, a world of unspoken feelings passing between them. Thomas was keenly aware that they were visible to much of the camp, including her father and probably Blackknife. He wanted to touch her, to make some gesture that would convey what he couldn't find words for, but propriety and uncertainty held him back. In the end, it was Several Moon who acted. She stepped forward and embraced him briefly but firmly, a gesture that managed to be both proper and deeply intimate. "Go safely, Thomas Hardin," she whispered near his ear. "Remember that you carry more than just a medallion from this place." When she stepped back, her eyes were bright with unshed tears, but her expression remained composed. With a final nod, she turned and walked back toward her grandmother's lodge, her steps measured and dignified, despite her condition. Thomas watched her go, a complex mixture of emotions churning within him. He was saved from his thoughts by the arrival of Two Hawks and Blackknife, both mounted and ready to depart. Two Hawks was older, perhaps in his 40s, with a weathered face and calm demeanor. He acknowledged Thomas with a brief nod. "We go now," Black Knife said impatiently. The sun rises and the trail grows no fresher. Thomas mounted Ghost, settling into the familiar comfort of the saddle. Running, Elk had returned and now raised his hand in farewell. Many other members of the tribe had gathered as well, watching silently as the three riders prepared to leave. "Remember," Running Elk called out as they turned their horses toward the north. "Adi, the medallion will guide you back if you choose to return." Thomas touched the bone circle at his chest and nodded once in acknowledgement. Then he urged Ghost forward, following two hawks into the rolling hills beyond the camp, acutely aware of several moons' absence among those who watched them depart. The three men rode in silence for the first hour, two hawks leading with the confidence of one who knew the land intimately, Black Knife following with stiff-backed reluctance, and Thomas bringing up the rear, his thoughts still tangled around the woman he'd left behind. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Black Knife dropped back to ride beside Thomas. "She will forget you," he said abruptly. "It is better that way." Thomas glanced at him, surprised by the direct address. "Is that what you want to happen?" Black Knife's jaw tightened. "What I want does not matter. I speak of what is best for her child, for our people." "And what is best in your view?" Thomas asked, genuinely curious about the young warrior's perspective. "That she find a man of our tribe, one who understands our ways, who will teach her son to be Blackfoot." Black Knife's voice held conviction. "The child's father was my cousin. He was brave, honorable. His son should know the ways of his people." Thomas couldn't argue with the logic. A white man and a Blackfoot woman, the daughter of a chief no less, would face obstacles that seemed insurmountable. Different worlds, different expectations, prejudice from both sides. "I respect her too much to make promises I can't keep," Thomas said finally. Black Knife studied him with narrowed eyes. "Perhaps you are not as foolish as I thought." It wasn't exactly a compliment, but it was the closest thing to approval the warrior had expressed. Two hawks called back to them in Blackfoot, pointing toward a distant ridge. Black Knife straightened in his saddle. "He has found sign of the cattle thieves," he translated for Thomas. "We follow the trail to the north." Thomas nodded, turning Ghost in the indicated direction. As they rode, he felt the medallion against his chest, a constant reminder of all he had left behind and all that might yet be waiting for him when his task was done. 2 weeks had passed since Thomas left the Blackfoot camp. 2 weeks of hard riding, tracking, and finally finding the cattle rustlers holed up in an abandoned mining settlement nestled in a remote valley. The thieves, 5 rough men with hard eyes and quick triggers, had been surprised by the approach of Thomas, Black Knife, and 2 hawks from the ridge above their hideout. The ensuing confrontation had been brief, but violent. 2 of the rustlers were dead, one by Thomas's bullet when the man had drawn on him, the other from Black Knife's precisely thrown knife as the rustler aimed at Thomas's back. The remaining 3 had surrendered once they realized they were outmatched. Now, as Thomas drove the recovered cattle back toward Matheson's ranch, he found himself riding alongside Black Knife, their relationship transformed by the shared danger they had faced. 2 hawks rode ahead, scouting the trail, while the bound rustlers followed behind under Thomas's watchful eye. "You are not what I expected, Thomas Hardin," Black Knife said, breaking a comfortable silence that had stretched between them for miles. "How so?" Thomas asked, nudging Ghost around a patch of prickly pear. Black Knife considered his words carefully. "You fight well, but without hunger for blood. You show mercy when it is deserved. And you," he hesitated, "you did not speak of several moon, even in the night when men often speak of women." Thomas nodded, understanding the unspoken respect in the warrior's words. She deserves better than to be talked around a campfire. Yes, Black Knife agreed, surprising Thomas with his candor. She does. He looked ahead to where the land began to flatten into the rangeland of Matheson's property. What will you do now? The white rancher will pay you, and your obligation will be fulfilled. It was the question Thomas had been asking himself throughout their journey. Each night, as he lay beneath the stars, his fingers would find the bone medallion, and his thoughts would turn to Several Moon, her quiet strength, her dignity, the way her eyes seemed to see into his very soul. I don't know, Thomas admitted. What I should do and what I want to do are different things. Black Knife studied him. In my tribe, we believe a man's path is shown to him through signs, if he has the wisdom to see them. He gestured to the medallion at Thomas's throat. The chief does not give such medicine lightly. Perhaps that is your sign. Thomas raised an eyebrow, surprised by Black Knife's change in perspective. But I thought you didn't want me anywhere near Several Moon or your people. A ghost of a smile touched the warrior's usually stern lips. What I want is not important. The signs speak of what should be. He looked away, his expression becoming distant. I have watched you these past days. You are not like other white men I have known. Perhaps you could belong among us. The admission clearly cost Black Knife some pride, and Thomas respected him all the more for it. Thank you, he said simply. They rode in silence for another mile before the buildings of Matheson's ranch came into view. Thomas felt a strange reluctance as they approached, knowing that once he completed this final part of his job, he would have to make the decision that had been weighing on him for weeks. Matheson himself came out to meet them, his weathered face breaking into a rare smile at the sight of his recovered cattle. The rancher was a fair man, gruff but honest, and he didn't seem particularly surprised by Thomas's native companions. Brought 'em back, just like I said I would, Thomas told him, dismounting. Matheson nodded, eyeing the bound rustlers with satisfaction. And the thieves too. Sheriff will be pleased. He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a leather pouch that clinked with the sound of coins. Your payment, as agreed, with a bonus for bringing back every last head. Thomas accepted the payment, then hesitated. Mr. Matheson, there's something I need to tell you. The rancher looked at him expectantly, and Thomas realized with sudden clarity what he was about to do, what he needed to do. I won't be available for work after this, he said. I've found somewhere I need to be. Matheson studied him for a moment, his eyes taking in the bone medallion, the beaded knife sheath, and the Blackfoot warriors waiting patiently nearby. Understanding dawned on his face. Well, he said finally, every man's got to find his own trail, I suppose. You've been a good hand, Harden. If you ever change your mind, there's work here for you. They shook hands, and Thomas felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The decision had been made, not in a moment of careful deliberation, but in the simple act of speaking his truth aloud. After turning the rustlers over to Matheson's foreman to be taken to the sheriff, Thomas rode with Black Knife and Two Hawks to the edge of the ranch property. There, he extended his hand to Two Hawks, who clasped it firmly. Thank you for your guidance, Thomas said. I wouldn't have found them without your help. Two Hawks nodded, a hint of approval in his usually stoic expression. You have a good eye for sign, for a white man. It was as close to a compliment as Thomas was likely to receive. Black Knife regarded Thomas with an intensity that spoke of newfound respect. You return to our camp now? Thomas nodded, his hand unconsciously touching the medallion. If I'm welcome. You are welcome, Black Knife confirmed. Running Elk has spoken, and he paused, seeming to wrestle with himself before continuing. "And I too would call you friend, Thomas Hardin." The admission clearly cost the proud warrior something, making it all the more meaningful. Thomas extended his hand, and Black Knife grasped it in the white man's gesture he had learned. "The journey is long," Two Hawks observed. "The moon grows full." Thomas understood the warning. Several moons' time was approaching. If he wanted to be there when her child was born, he needed to ride hard. "Then let's not waste daylight," he said, turning Ghost toward the north. The journey back to the Blackfoot camp took 5 days of hard riding. Each night, Thomas found himself growing more certain of his decision, even as questions of how such a life might work remained unanswered. He was a white man entering a world that had every reason to reject him. Yet something pulled him forward, something stronger than doubt, stronger than reason. As they crested the final ridge overlooking the valley where the Blackfoot had made their camp, Thomas felt his heart quicken. The teepees stood in their familiar circle, smoke rising from cooking fires, the ordinary activities of daily life continuing below. "They have not moved yet," Black Knife observed. "The summer hunting grounds will wait until after several moons' child is born." Thomas nodded, relief washing through him. He hadn't been too late. They rode into camp just as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains. People stopped their activities to watch the 3 riders approach, recognition and surprise spreading through the gathered tribe. Word traveled quickly, and by the time they reached the center of the camp, Running Elk was waiting for them. The chief's expression remained impassive, but Thomas thought he detected a glimmer of satisfaction in the older man's eyes. "You have returned," Running Elk stated simply. "I have," Thomas confirmed, dismounting from Ghost. "If you'll still have me." Running Elk nodded, as if Thomas's return was exactly what he had expected. "You wear the medallion, it has guided you home." Home. The word resonated within Thomas like the strike of a bell. He had not had a true home since Emma's death, since the war that had taken so much from him. Yet somehow, against all odds, he had found one here among people who should have been strangers. "Where is Several Moon?" he asked, unable to contain the question any longer. A woman's voice answered from behind him. "I am here, Thomas Hardin." He turned to see Several Moon standing in the entrance to a large teepee, one hand resting on her now prominent belly. Her hair was loose around her shoulders, and her face, though tired, glowed with an inner light that took his breath away. Without conscious thought, Thomas moved toward her, stopping only when they stood face to face. For a moment, neither spoke, their eyes saying what words could not. "You came back," she said finally, wonder in her voice despite her earlier confidence that he would. "I promised to listen to my heart," Thomas replied softly. "Oh, it led me here." Several Moon's smile was like the breaking of dawn after the longest night. She reached out, her fingers touching the medallion at his throat before moving to rest against his chest, feeling the heart that beat beneath. "Then welcome home, Thomas Hardin," she said. Behind them, Running Elk raised his voice to address the gathered tribe. He spoke in Blackfoot, but Thomas caught his own name mentioned several times. When the chief finished speaking, there was a moment of silence. Then a murmur of acceptance spread through the crowd. Black Knife appeared at Thomas's side. "The chief says, 'You are now truly one of us,'" he translated. "Not just a friend of the Blackfoot, but Blackfoot in heart." He paused, then added with the ghost of a smile, "He also says that if you make his daughter unhappy, he will personally remove your scalp." Thomas couldn't help but laugh, the tension of the moment breaking. "Tell him I understand. He understands your language better than he pretends," Black Knife replied with a hint of amusement. But I will tell him." As the camp returned to its normal activities, now buzzing with the news of Thomas's return, Several Moon took his hand and led him toward her grandmother's teepee. "There is much to discuss," she said. "Many things to decide before the child comes." Thomas nodded, knowing she was right. The path ahead would not be easy. There would be challenges, misunderstandings, and prejudices to overcome. The world outside this valley would not understand or accept what they were building here. But as he walked beside Several Moon, feeling the weight of the medallion against his chest and the warmth of her hand in his, Thomas knew with bone-deep certainty that he had finally found what he had been searching for all these years, not just a place to belong, but a reason to stay. The lone cowboy was lone no more. In the days that followed, Thomas became Thomas Many Horses, taking a Blackfoot name that acknowledged both his skill with Ghost and his journey to find his true home. And when Several Moon's son was born beneath the full moon exactly as she had predicted, the boy was given two names, one in Blackfoot that honored his birth father's courage, and one in English, Thomas, that honored the man who had chosen to be his father in all the ways that mattered. The story of the white cowboy who saved a chief's daughter and found his heart among the Blackfoot would be told around campfires for generations. But for Thomas, the greatest story wasn't the rescue or the battle with the slave traders. It was the quiet moments, teaching his stepson to ride, watching Several Moon smile as she worked beside the other women, earning the respect of warriors like Black Knife through shared hunts and battles. It was the story of a man who had wandered lost since the war, carrying wounds that wouldn't heal until he found that sometimes the greatest act of courage isn't saving someone else. It's allowing yourself to be saved in return.